and welcome to the Unlocking Behavior Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behavior. Today I have with me, as always, Professor Robert West. Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
I am feeling good.
I hear you were playing tennis earlier.
I was. I was expecting to be thrashed, but actually it was very close in the end. So lovely sunny day, playing well. What's not to like?
And sounds like you won.
I didn't win, but I got close enough.
How was my week? Are you going to ask that?
All right, whatever.
I went for a beautiful walk around my local neighborhood. It's the hottest day of the year today as we're recording this. I don't know when people will be listening to it, but right now you can imagine that we're recording with beautiful spring foliage outside. How's that?
Nice. And where you live, it's got some lovely walks.
Lovely walks. Okay, so we won't tell listeners exactly where I live. Do not want to be stalked again. Okay, so season 1 is all about decision making. And today we're going to be talking about different types of decisions and why it's important to learn about those and to differentiate between types of decisions and how that can help us.
Yeah, and it makes a difference as to what the type of decision is, because then it affects the ways in which you go about making the decision and the amount of time and resource that you put into it.
Right. So if you have a decision, well, let's get into actually what our first pair are. And these are revocable or irrevocable decisions. Yeah. What's a revocable decision? Sort of obvious, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, this is something that is very important in real world decisions, but doesn't come up a lot in the sort of judgment and decision making scientific literature, because they don't really go into very much the sort of the kind of temporal side of the decisions and the consequences of them. But anyway, so revocable or revocable.
Oh, you want me to... Revocable. Maybe I'm saying it wrong.
Revocable decisions are ones in which you can make the decision, but it's not set in stone. You can change your mind at some point, at any time. At some point, it might become irrevocable. But let's say you decide where you're going to go on holiday, and you decide that you're going to go to Lisbon in Portugal, and but as you're then looking into the various options, other things come into play, and you look at flights and you think, well, actually, they're a bit, they look a bit expensive, or you're looking at accommodation and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure that I'm finding something that I like, so that you can go back and revisit that initial decision and say, well, actually, maybe I won't go to Lisbon. So you've decided, you've formed an intention, you've started the process of making further investigations in order to implement that decision. And in the process of that implementation, you have an opportunity to go back and say, well, actually, let's revisit this. This is very common in the decision-making world. And it's important to understand when you are and are not in that position, because sometimes people go, well, I've made the decision, that's it. I'm not changing my mind again. I'm not going to go back and revisit it because I've made it. When in fact, that would be the best thing to do. Would be, have it. You get into the weeds of the implementation, and you start thinking, well, hang on a minute, this isn't working out. This is true for policy decisions, for example, where you start to make you make what you think is a broad policy decision about, for example, setting trade tariffs on the rest of the world, and then as you get into the implementation phase, you think, well, actually, how's this going to work? You start to see consequences you hadn't really thought through, or you realize that actually putting it into effect is going to be more difficult than you thought. And you may then go back and say, well, actually, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. So those are revocable decisions that if you recognize that they're revocable, then you can adjust the way you do things accordingly.
And irrevocable decisions or irrevocable decisions, depending on who you are and what you think is the right pronunciation, that is a decision that cannot be undone. That is a omelette you cannot unscramble. It's an egg That's you cannot unscramble.
Yeah. So, I mean, in theory, there's a gray area because, maybe you could. It's just it would be a really bad idea to do it. An example of that might be, for example, if you're setting up a new organization, a political party, for example, and you're thinking about the name of the party, and at some point you make a decision, you've got to make a decision, what's the name going to be? And you start, once you've decided on that, you start to implement that decision with all your logos and you have a press conference and all the rest of it. That's not going to be a really good idea for you to then turn around and say, actually, you know what, that wasn't such a great idea. Let's change it. And understanding that is important because there'll be times when you think in theory that you could change your mind about something, but actually it's not a good idea. You'd be, even if the decision isn't working out like you thought, it's much better to carry on and make that decision work rather than go back to the drawing board and think about the decision again. And again, a very common scenario in real world decision making, because the world is a very uncertain place and because decisions that we make, we don't know for sure that they're going to work out. There's all sorts of uncertainties and new things that come up, or you may have miscalculated. But very often in these situations, you can make it work. And that's your best strategy, is to make some kind of decision and make it work.
Right. And we also have another pair in the book that we talk about, which is the difference between mutable decisions. You kind of already touched on this, and immutable decisions. So a mutable decision is something that, you can change the decision as you go along?
Yes, that's right. So it may sound like they are similar to the other pairing of revocable and irrevocable, but there is an important difference. Mutable decisions are ones where you can adjust your decision-making as things evolve so that you can take account of changing circumstances. So it's like a guided missile type approach. You set the thing off on a particular trajectory, but as you as things go along and new information becomes available, and you see how it progresses, you can alter the course. Whereas immutable decisions are like fire and forget missiles, where once it's done, that's it. There's nothing more you can do about it. You've just got to let nature take its course. And this is an important thing to know. It's important to know which of these situations you're in, and not to, for example, believe that you're in a situation where there's nothing you can do once you've made the decision, the immutable one, when actually there is. Or the other way around, to make a decision where you think, I'm going to be able to adjust this as I go along, and actually you discover that you can't. What's done is done. Being very clear in your mind when you're making these decisions, is it revocable or irrevocable? And is it mutable or immutable? It's going to be one of those cells.
And I always think of holidays when I think of this, because it's very clear and in your face when you're booking a holiday. If you're booking a flight, if you pay a bit more money, sometimes you can alter the flight or even cancel the flight in advance. So that would then, if you pay a bit more money, it becomes fully revocable.
Yeah.
And the same when you're booking on a hotel website or something like Airbnb, where sometimes if you pay everything, sometimes they want you to pay right now. And then if you want to pay more, you can have flexibility right up to the day when you get there. And so you become very conscious of the trade-offs between going, oh, okay, well, I definitely, I better go on this holiday. I usually, if I only do the one where there's no flexibility, if I'm literally about to go, because it's quite risky, especially for risky. A long stay.
Yeah. I think there's a really good examples, the flight booking, because they come up a lot. And the temptation is to want to save money by going for the irrevocable decision, because you think, well, it'll be fine. I can't think of any reason why I wouldn't go or why I wouldn't be able to go. But the world is an uncertain place, and there may be all sorts of reasons. And in the end, and you just don't know. And so the fact that you can't imagine at this point in time any reason why things would go off track is not a good reason for going for something that you couldn't change later. So for the sake of however much money it is, generally speaking, you want to give yourself the maximum flexibility.
Yeah, if you can afford it and that sort of thing. Because there are costs involved. But it's not just financial costs when it comes to changing a decision, is it? Sometimes, you sort of hinted at this, there can be an emotional cost. If you feel committed to a decision, sometimes it can, even if you could go back on it, going back on it would make you feel uncomfortable or guilty or bad.
And also, sometimes it's just annoying when people keep changing their mind about things, when you've decided you're going to go out for dinner and then an hour before you go out for dinner, whoever you're going with says, well, actually, you know what? I don't really feel like it. It's like, so there is a reason why once we form intentions to do things, that has a momentum to it. It should have a momentum to it. You can't, it's not a good way to go about your life. Keep changing your mind about things because you keep weighing up the pros and cons every time. There is a reason why it's a good idea to set a bar for changing your mind about something, when in theory you could. So I agree with you. There is an emotional cost, but it's also a pragmatic cost. So and everyone will have their own thresholds for this. Some people, it's not an issue. Changing your mind about stuff, whatever. And other people actually go to the other extreme, which is no, I've decided I'm going to do it. It's not. You sure this is still a good idea? No. Well, I've made the decision. It's done.
Yeah, I think in all my research and the conversations we've had over the years about decision making, it comes up again and again that wisdom and experience tend to play a huge role in good decision making. And it's sort of like not too much, not too little. It's a kind of a Goldilocks thing that you're looking for. And at the same time, you don't want to be looking for the perfect decision all the time. That's another sort of trap you can fall into. And it can feel, I think decision making, and one of the reasons I suppose it's interesting to talk about is it can feel quite overwhelming. We all have different approaches, different styles, but we can struggle with decision making, should we be making a sort of a very rational choice, or is it a decision that's actually more emotionally based in terms of, that might be a decision that really doesn't have that kind of consequence, like where you go for dinner. Well, I'd feel better if we went for Italian rather than a different option. And it's your emotions that you're playing with. There's no rational sort of.
Yeah, and that is a difference, another difference between different decision makings, which is where decisions in which there is a right or wrong answer. There is, if you get it wrong, bad things will happen because there was a right answer, even if you couldn't necessarily work it out. And what other ones where it's a preference, it's like, I could choose this on the menu, or I could choose that on the menu. And then, maybe you choose the fish or whatever, and it's not what you'd hoped. It's not the end of the world. It's just, and you don't even know. Maybe the alternative would have been worse. So preference type decisions versus sort of analytical decisions where it's a good idea to try and work stuff out. And knowing which is which, it's not pretending that a preference decision is something where you can actually work out the answer and fretting about getting it wrong, and being, and very often in these decisions, there's more than one answer. It's not just that there's just one right answer, and you'll never know anyway. Even if things go wrong, you won't know what would have happened later. So I think people can often with decision making set up tension and expectations unnecessarily, and you when in fact just get on with it, do the best you can, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that was JFK's approach to the Bay of Pigs, wasn't it?
And see how that turned out.
Well, exactly. So I'm enjoying these pairs of decisions. We have another one for our listeners. Hot and cool decisions. What are they?
Hot and cool decisions are ones that vary in the amount of conflict, of felt conflict and emotional engagement there is in them. And in the scientific field of judgment and decision-making, they've mainly focused on cool decisions, on making judgments about the likelihood that things are going to happen, hypothetical scenarios, and so on, which means that people are seeing the decision as a problem to be solved. It's, like a maths problem, and try to get the right answer.
Maybe like a judge weighing up a decision, weighing up evidence, and then delivering a verdict.
Dispassionately. But of course, in the real world, decisions that matter are very rarely of that kind because they matter. And when things matter, then emotions are engaged, and that's when we start to have to bring in what we understand about the way that emotions play a role in our decision making, and that's the hot decision making. So cool decision making, decision making is where we focus on our analytical skills and judgment processes, and hot decision making is where our emotions are either forming part of the decision process in terms of what we like, what we don't like, what we feel comfortable about, what we don't, but also the way that emotions influence our judgment, the actual way that we analyze the decision problem. So
a hot decision might be a flash sale. This is a 1 week only sale or a 1 hour only sale, but all those Black Friday deals, and actually now that turns into a whole week, or they even extend it to a month at times, don't they, these sales? But they say this is a limited time only, and the shorter that time pressure is, the hotter the decision sort of is, as opposed to a cool decision, which is, well, you could buy this anytime, or you imagine the price is going to remain relatively stable. And then these other kinds of examples, like a judge weighing evidence, or maybe you're just at work. I suppose there's always a time pressure on a decision in the real world, which is making sure that no decision maybe is completely cool.
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum because, as you say, well, I mean, some decisions are about as cool as you can get, which is where you've got a participant sitting in a decision-making lab, making a hypothetical decision about something that doesn't matter. Even then, often the participant will be feeling judged about whether they're going to make the right decision or not. So there'll be a bit of emotion there. But and obviously, if you look at judges in law courts and so on, they're not dispassionate. They will have their own feelings about the crime that's committed, about the defendants and the victim and so on. So even when it's our job to be as dispassionate as we possibly can be, it's impossible to be completely dispassionate. And by the same token, if you go to the other extreme of really hot decisions where there's a lot of conflict and a lot of maybe anxiety or tension around the decision, there's still analytical processes going on. Your brain is still making comparisons. So it is a spectrum. And I think it is important for the decision maker and whoever is analyzing the decision to have a pretty good sense of where that decision is for the decision maker on that spectrum, because it will make a difference to how they go about the decision problem, the decision task.
It's a good thing to be aware of, isn't it? I've noticed in recent years that, it's been in the news even, that ticket prices for shows have sometimes, I forget what they call it, dynamic pricing, where when the show's popular, for example, at the moment it goes on sale, they inflate the prices. And, there's been a lot of pushback against this. I don't know where they're at with it at the moment. But I know from my own experience, not even with dynamic pricing, but they have waiting rooms to get you into the place. So you're there much earlier now, and you get more and more sort of heightened and stressed, and you're thinking, oh my God, there's so much competition. We had this when we had to go and see. We had this when we wanted to go and see David Gilmour, and we did get to go and see him, but that was probably the most stressful experience I had buying a ticket for a show, which, we really wanted to see. And we did go and see, but even at the show, I was sort of suffering from the trauma of having to sort of buy, and because you're panicked, now you're the head of the queue and now you've got to pick a ticket and wait, these are too expensive and what are these? And you're kind of overwhelmed. That, and these are tactics that are being used on you, really. They are
marketing. A classic marketing tactic, obviously, is to put time pressure on the decision maker to so that their decision making processes engage the sort of instincts rather than a cool analytical processes. And particularly if you feel that the longer you wait, the more your chance of achieving whatever it is you want to achieve is ebbing away. You see that a lot with negotiations as well. I mean, it's an important negotiating or widely used negotiating tactic. And it's not completely artificial, because if you, as you rightly say, and we're going to cover this in later podcasts, the time factor is always present, even when it's not obviously present. It is always present, even when it's self-imposed. It's like there's no actual deadline, but there is a sense in which you've got to get on with stuff, and you can't just keep going round and round in circles when you're making decisions indefinitely. So the time factor is something that is used as a marketing technique, and as a negotiating technique. And when people are trying to constrain other people's decision making, it is used to heat up a decision process. But there are other ways in which that can happen as well. And there are ways in which, as a decision maker, you can reflect on it and take a deep breath and go, hang on a minute. Actually, I don't need to make the decision right now. I can afford to wait reasonably. But also, I don't have to follow the decision problem as it's set for me. I can think about it in a different way, and it's a good idea to step back. Very often that will be the case, probably more often than people realize.
So that's a really good thing to be aware of, maybe just to note and go, hang on a minute, somebody's making this decision too hot for me, but it doesn't need to be that way, and you can cool it down. And potentially, I suppose you could have the other way around, where people are just going round in circles and then no decision is being made and you need to heat it up a bit so that you get on with life.
Yeah. Getting the right temperature is the thing,
Get the right temperature. I like that. Turn it into a meme. So we've almost come to the end of the podcast. We've had a little look at revocable and irrevocable. I can't even say it. Maybe that's why I don't like saying it. Irrevocable decisions. Decisions that can be reversed and decisions that once you've done them, that's it. And that's very important to know which one of those that you're doing. And many times you are actually able to take a decision back. But even if you're not, many decisions after you've taken them can be changed. That's a mutable decision. And there are, of course, immutable decisions, as we said, like scrambling an egg. That one you cannot take back. So, and then, of course, these hot and cool decisions. So I think for listeners, naming these things, knowing what they are, and even in much more complicated decisions, you need to have a clear idea of what you can change at any given point.
Yeah, absolutely. And being conscious of it. Not when we make decisions, we fall into patterns of doing things without actually being aware that that's what we're doing. So saying, to what extent is this a revocable or irrevocable decision? To what extent is this a mutable or immutable one? Where does this lie on the temperature spectrum? Is it hot or cold? And am I in the right place for it? Can I cool it down, or should I be heating it up? That kind of thing. Making conscious decisions and reflecting on these things has generally got to be a good thing.
Well, I love that. What better note to end the podcast on? Thank you so much, Robert.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jamie.
And remember to subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, like the podcast, whatever it is that they ask you to do. I have no idea. The links to buy our books are in the description. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the Unlocking Behavior Change podcast.